Are you ready to branch out, to take a leap of faith, to love yourself and others fully? Then let go of whatever no longer serves you to take action now on Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills, living it up, loving it up, and letting it go. Erica will energize and excite you to power up your passionate dream that sets your soul on fire. With Erica's E3 approach, equipping, empowering, and enlightening yourself so you can be yourself for yourself. Get ready and get rooted to live a life without regrets, without what ifs, without should haves, and especially without empty feelings from a life unexplored. This hit show helps you build powerful and intentional roots to live it up, love it up, and let it go. Get fearlessly ready and powerfully rooted in your yes with your host, Erica Gifford Mills, and be fearless about your more and stand in your yes. Now on Get Rooted Radio.
Welcome, everyone. I am Erica Gifford Mills, and you are listening to Get Rooted Radio, living it up, loving it up, letting it go, right here on Transformation Talk Radio. A big shout out, as always, to my producer today, Nat. Nat, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Erica. I'm glad to be back today. Should be a good show. I'm excited.
Wonderful. And today's episode is titled Resilience, Redemption, and the Ripple Effect. And in today's episode, my guest, Gladian Rivera, and I will dive into resilience, redemption, and the ripple effects of working with survivors, offenders, and systems. This episode will explore lessons on healing, accountability, and creating change. We will also touch on overcoming vicarious trauma and staying positive through challenges. But at first, a little bit about my guest. Gladian Rivera is a servant leader and a dynamic professional whose career has been defined by innovation and a commitment to meaningful change, with a background that spans working with survivors, batterers, and within the correctional system. Gladian has gained deep insights into the complexities of human behavior and transformation. Known for her ability to create and help establish impactful programs and navigate environments, Gladian brings a unique perspective on leadership, accountability, and trauma-informed care. She is passionate about sharing hard-earned lessons on navigating adversity, fostering growth, and building hope in difficult circumstances. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Gladian.
Thank you for having me today.
And it is a pleasure. I met Gladian just a few months ago, actually last month, I guess it was beginning of last month in November, when we were at a speaking engagement in Valencia, Spain. And I loved her message, and I just knew I had to have her on the show. So I'd love for you to start by just telling listeners a little bit about yourself.
Great, absolutely. So I will start by saying that I have a lot of experience working in the systems for both state and federal government. Prior to that, I worked specifically with victims of domestic and sexual violence, and with batterers, and with individuals in the correctional system. And a little bit about me that I don't often share is that I have a little bit over 20 years of experience practicing Taekwondo. And I got up to my fourth dan in Kukiwon. And I have trained well over 300 plus black belts. So that's a little bit that I can share.
And I love that, because we are kindred spirits that way. We're one tough cookies, that's for sure.
We have to be.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So what inspired you to begin your career working with survivors?
It actually happened very organically. And as a matter of fact, it all started when I was teaching martial arts. I was approximately 16, 17 years old. I was teaching a class with a few 4 to 6 year olds. And I remember very vividly an instance where I was teaching a class, and one of my female students, my young female student, turned around and she had noticed a gentleman walked up the stairs, and her reaction was so powerful that obviously I had to stop the class and I had to inquire why she had this particular reaction. Thankfully, nothing had happened, but it left me with such an impression related to how someone could react when they experience fear. And my mother had also studied criminal justice extensively. And I remember she would take me to some of her classes. And I think I shared this with you before. I still have a memory of her going to class, ballistics class specifically. And it very organically happened. It shaped my perspective. I really wanted to work in the criminal justice system, but I felt very inclined to do work more specifically with the victims. And it was until I was in graduate school that I noticed a pattern. All my research and literature was referencing sex offenders or sexual victimization or the impact of trauma. And so that evolved into working in a nonprofit setting. I worked for the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, followed by another nonprofit in New Jersey. And it sort of evolved and it became a passion of mine. It became something that was incredibly important for me. And I am now here, and hopefully that I can teach the listeners a few things about what those systems look like and the overall impact victims go through, and some patterns of behavior I also notice from the offenders.
So being in this environment and working with survivors and all the emotion that goes into it, there's trauma there and there's high emotions. How do you manage those emotional challenge with working with the survivors and even then the batterers and inmates in that high stress environment?
I will be very honest with you. In the beginning, it was incredibly challenging. I think that a lot of the stories stayed with me. When you work as a service provider in this particular space, you're always going to remember some instances that have a lot of impact on you. And so I had to learn to not just set boundaries around my work and colleagues, but I also had to set boundaries with myself as to I am going to focus on this particular victim for this 1 hour. And then after that, I am going to step away and going to take care of myself. Now, I will say this, my coping mechanisms are probably different than most service providers. Metal music is one of my ways to process and refresh and restart. And it was very helpful for me. Martial arts also kept me very centered, I'll say that, and journaling. Journaling from my perspective, journaling from what I was going through and the experiences that I was seeing and how it was also impacting me. And eventually it evolved into developing a more grounded sense of resilience, in that I am there to support them, not to save them. That's really important. Empower them, and that this is their journey, this is their story, and I'm just a guiding post.
Speaking of that resilience, you really have to cultivate a strong mindset during that time. So were there any specific tools or habits or even people that you turn to, mentors or other colleagues, or even outside of your work that you turn to really build that strong mindset?
So I'll say that resilience was heavily based on the coping mechanisms that I had implemented. So as I mentioned, martial arts was a very strong foundation for me. And I also want to echo that while I was working full-time, working with the victims or survivors, I also taught martial arts classes. And so that gave me this yin and yang sort of effect of working with someone that was at their most sensitive point in their lives versus working with a child that needed to learn a jumping back kick to knock out someone during competition, right? And so that really helped me get grounded and push forward. There was also a lot of literature that I had read. David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me book is one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book on resilience. It definitely has a lot of wisdom. It really talks about understanding that even though we might encounter very difficult challenges in life, it is up to us to push forward and push through. I will also say, admittedly, and I rarely ever talk about this, I was raised very Christian with my family, and having that closeness to my faith. And in the times where I struggled, the book of Proverbs, the Psalms were very helpful. And there were many people in my life that certainly helped me get centered. I would say that my grandmother was definitely a tremendous foundation for me. She is what I consider to be one of the most strongest women that I know. She had a very difficult upbringing. Her life was, it should be written into a novel. And in observing what she went through and learning the things that she went through and seeing her strength and her power was definitely indicative to me as her granddaughter and observer that I too can push through.
Yeah.
And obviously, there were people in the workplace that were helpful. I recall this one fantastic therapist. Her name is Becky. She was one of the most inspiring people, tremendously calm, very grounded, and wise beyond her years. And when I went into the correctional system, I met this amazing, amazing leader. I will shout out her name, Dr. Darcella Sessoms. And she was one of those people that embodied strength and empowerment and resilience. So I think a combination of the physical aspects from martial arts, the spiritual aspect from the Christianity, my family, and certainly great people that I had the opportunity to work with certainly helped me.
And I think that's important as you had built that strong mindset. I'm sure that you had seen a lot of the human capacity to heal and to grow. How has your work influenced that understanding?
It definitely taught me to not feel bad about myself, that even though things are bad or we perceive them to be negative in that moment, and we all go through these moments in life, we all go through those challenges, those obstacles, those moments when we feel terribly down. Working with these survivors really showed me that we are truly beyond our capabilities to grow and to become better and develop that inner strength. Ultimately, it's all about the process. It's all about understanding that that's the life, that's the journey that we're on. And we have to either choose, do I let this kick me down and I stay down and I wear that blanket labeled victim? Or do I want to get up and fight and be a champion or a thriver?
Fall down 7, get up 8, right?
We keep falling, we keep getting up.
Yes. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about redemption and accountability. But before we go, Gladian, tell folks how they connect with you.
Absolutely. Right now, I have a LinkedIn page. You can reach out to me at my LinkedIn page by searching my first name and my last name. That's Gladian Rivera. I'm sure that they'll find my information on your bio. And I will eventually set up a sort of system for people to connect with me more directly.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. You are listening to Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills. Living it up, loving it up, letting it go. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills. Living it up, loving it up, letting it go. If you missed any portion of today's episode, you can catch it on getrootedradio.com. Don't forget to subscribe online to receive the latest news, events, and words of encouragement. That's getrootedradio.com. Welcome back to my guest, Gladian Rivera. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So during the last segment, we discussed resilience in action. And during this segment, we're going to explore redemption and accountability. So how did you become involved in working with batterers and offenders? Because we talked about your work with the survivors, but how did you get involved in working with the other side? And what did you hope to achieve from that?
Really interesting story. I had applied for the position that I noticed had opened up on the correctional system in my state. And initially, I didn't think I was going to get it. When I finally did get the position and I had to sit down with each one of my clients who were predominantly victims of both sexual and domestic violence, one of them in particular, I recall, she mentioned that by helping those who have harmed them would eventually stop them from continuing doing harm. And so at first, I didn't think anything of it, but believe it or not, I don't know if this has happened to you where you have met someone that tells you one thing and in that moment you don't process it or you don't really get to grasp the heaviness of those words.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. When I first started working, initially I don't want to work with this population. I don't want to work in the prison system. What did I do? I'm doing it for the money. And then I started running programs and I got to see another side of the inmate population. I got to see a part of both lost humanity, a part of that thirst for leaving that system and becoming human again. I saw people who knew they had done harm and they truly felt apologetic and remorseful. And I was blessed with the opportunity to see innate strength from these offenders in wanting to grow and get out of those circumstances. I'm not saying that it was all pink unicorns and butterflies at all, but there were a couple of the guys that I had the opportunity to work with that I did see some true change. And it was in those moments that it helped me understand and accept that people can change, that we are not defined by the worst mistakes that we have done in our lives.
Yeah, and I think that is important because when you judge, I mean, it's always like you don't judge a book by its cover, right? You have to look at, your past does not define you, as you said, I think in the first segment, but it's how do you go forward for that? So how did your experience working with this population shape your perspective on accountability and change?
Well, it certainly gave me better optics, a full 360-degree view. I worked with the victim population and I had the opportunity to see what trauma does firsthand. One thing I didn't get to mention briefly is that I also worked in the hospital setting. So I also got to work with victims immediately after an attack. And so that was different from working with them months or maybe years later where they needed to process their experiences, to then working with men and women in the system who had also some level of trauma. I worked with some of the female offenders in particular. Most of them had been victims of rape, unfortunately. And so in that particular area, I really got to see what those negative coping mechanisms can do to someone, right? And so some of them became drug addicts. They used drugs, for them to be able to let go or forget what happened to them. Some of them engaged in some other crimes because it was a way for them to get out from their abuser. I'm not saying that this is the story for every woman in the correctional system. Certainly that is not the case. I do believe that they are people who commit crimes, regardless of their past, and they should be held accountable. But working in this particular system, it gave me better optics. And ultimately, I feel that it gave me the opportunity to love humanity. I don't know how else to explain that. To really see that we are people that go through terrible things in life, and sometimes it changes us, sometimes not for the so good or for the better. And it really is up to us to save ourselves. No one is going to come and save us.
Absolutely. And I think that's, you had mentioned that it's not always unicorns and rainbows, right? And you do have people who are very remorseful, and you can see that they are changing, and they want to do the right thing going forward. They're very remorseful, as you said, and really do want to move forward. That being said, you probably have also seen the manipulative behaviors. So how do you manage those dynamics while trying to really focus on the rehabilitation and safety?
Well, I will step back for a minute to share that manipulation has been everywhere that I've been, whether that may have been working with survivors, believe it or not, working with colleagues, working with batterers or the inmate population. I think that if I could share one lesson, would be know what your boundaries are, know what you are willing to tolerate and what you are unwilling to withstand. Understand that some people do have ill intentions, even if they present as the nicest and kindest people. I got to see this a lot in the prison system. Some of the inmates would act very nice towards me, very kind, but they always wanted something, right? And that's how it starts. That's how manipulation starts in the prison system. That's how you hear about these stories of, well, this correctional officer engaged in sexual acts with an inmate. Well, what led to that? And a lot of it starts with manipulation. It starts with exploiting a person's insecurities. So you have to be mindful that we are humans. We all have our own insecurities. And we want to make sure that when we go into these systems, that we protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's not just in the systems, right? I mean, I think we find this out in the world, right? We have in any workplace and in any personal or professional, you're going to have those manipulative behaviors. And it is what we have to look at, what we have to protect ourselves from, and know those signs. So are there some different, red flags that you might be cautious of?
Right. Although I'm not the person to provide a masterclass in manipulation or the tactics of manipulation, I will say that a couple of things. Be mindful of the person that tries too hard, too quickly to earn your trust. Why are they trying to do that? Why are they trying to suddenly give you a lot of attention, a lot of affection sometimes too? And in Valencia, when I spoke about this particular subject, I recall that I mentioned that there's the love bombing phase that you see in domestic violence relationships, but it's also very similar, linked to what some manipulators or covert narcissists use in the workplace. They'll try to shower you with attention. They'll try to give you great reviews, right? They'll treat you differently. And so you have to, and it feels good. It feels good. We all want to feel special, right? We all, and that's what, especially when you're a woman and a minority woman, hearing someone say constantly, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're fantastic. It's like, oh, that's fantastic. I'm finally getting the acknowledgement I deserve. But step away from that for a bit. Where is this coming from? Is it genuine? So look for that. Also look for how is the work being divided? And is that person putting you against another person? Or is the information not being shared accordingly? So for instance, a person who manipulates groups, they might tell Adam information that they may tell David that is completely the opposite and completely withhold the information from Michelle, right? So, information manipulation and it's one that I would suggest keep an eye out. I would say that in systems where there is a power dynamic, which is generally everywhere, right? Any workplace has power dynamics, and it may not necessarily be related to a person's title, like a leader. You're going to find some level of manipulation, gossiping, right? Using gossip by way to get people to not like or get with someone in the office. That's another way to manipulate. But I say this, keep your eyes open, your ears to the ground, make notes, have great memory, work on that memory, and treat people with respect. Because even if we go into these places and we think, oh, I'm being manipulated, just be authentic to the extent that you can be, but be respectful, but always be mindful and be careful.
Great advice. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the ripple effects of trauma. Before we go, Gladian, tell folks how they can connect with you.
Absolutely. I have a LinkedIn page, and you can search me by typing my full name. That's Gladian Rivera.
Thank you so much. I'm Erica Gifford Mills, and you are listening to Get Rooted Radio, living it up, loving it up, letting it go. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills, living it up, loving it up, letting it go. Don't forget to visit getrootedradio.com to listen to a replay of this episode, sign up for helpful tips, and learn about upcoming events. That's getrootedradio.com. Welcome back to my guest, Gladian Rivera. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So during the last two segments, we've talked about resilience in action and redemption and accountability. And then during this segment, we're going to really talk about the ripple effects of trauma. And one of the things I'm curious to know is any unique challenges that you might have come across when you're addressing trauma in survivors versus offenders.
Absolutely. So I will say that for the listeners that may have never heard this term before, vicarious trauma is something that is truly real. And it's something that unfortunately I encountered, and I was unaware that I was dealing with this until I approached my supervisor and I said, I'm having these experiences. What's going on? Yeah. And so what that means is when you are exposed to traumatic stories, or you are servicing someone that you get to observe the impact of their trauma on a consistent basis, right? It's almost like a sponge. It affects you. And so that can impact you in many ways, from having mood swings, experiencing nightmares, not experiencing joy. Some people may develop depression. And I unfortunately was having those nightmares. I was dealing with a lot of thoughts of maybe people are inherently evil, and I became a cynic, and that's unhealthy. And the second portion that I would say for people to be wary of is burnout, right? So when you are in a heavily emotionally burdened environment, particularly in the workspace, with the work that I was doing, listening to these stories nonstop, I started burning out. I didn't want to get up anymore. I was not looking forward to going back in there. It's almost like you're getting ready to walk into battle and feeling like, okay, I'm just too tired and too strained to do this. So when you can no longer help others and you recognize that you cannot continue it this way, you have to help yourself first.
Well, and I think that is some of what you came across when you're working with victims. And I think it goes to show like the whole ripple effect, and not only working with them, but the ripple effect of an offense. So I worked, as a Janine Jeske, she here in Wisconsin, she had a restorative justice program, and she was working with inmates to talk to them about the ripple effect of their crime. You didn't just commit a crime against this one person. It was against their family, because there's effects on the victims' families or the survivors' families. There's effects now on the offenders' families. There's effect in the community, and that just ripples it out, right? It shows that it wasn't just, and I think sometimes what we were seeing in that restorative justice program is that the offender didn't always look past that. They were looking at it was just this person. And to me, what I'm hearing here is that it's even further, right? Because now the individuals that are working with not only the victims and survivors and offenders, it affects them, because many people carry that trauma, as you said, the fatigue, the vicarious trauma, the burnout, and then that affects them, which then affects their family, and so it grows into an even bigger ripple effect. And
Absolutely.
it goes to the professionals in your field and coping, and then getting back to what you have to do for those coping mechanisms that we talked about in the first segment. And I think sometimes people don't realize the gravity of their behavior and how it does affect greater and larger, and what we need to work on and be those agents of change.
Absolutely. And I will say that I worked in a similar program to what you just explained. It was a restorative justice-based program where I taught the participants, the inmate population, for 12 weeks, what each crime was and how each crime impacted the primary victim, the secondary victim, the family,
Right.
and the tertiary victim, which is the community as a whole. And at the completion of the program, the participants had the opportunity to write a letter to the victim, but obviously it needed to be approved by the district, by the prosecutor of
Right.
their case before being submitted to the victim. And part of the program also entailed bringing survivors of different crimes to share their own experiences. And that was what I would say blew their minds, because now they had front row seat to what really goes on with a person who has been stabbed, almost killed, and they have the photos to, pass around. And you could be the most hardened criminal, but let me tell you, I have seen them break and cry when we had victims come in and really share their stories.
Yeah.
Again, it's trying to get them back in touch with the humanity, but overall, the ripple effects of crime are far beyond that of the scope of what I'm sharing right now, right? It does not just impact the victim and their family and community as a whole. It also impacts the person who did it,
Yes.
right? But they don't get to see it. They don't get to see it. Or they don't get to acknowledge it until sometimes years later. They see that they're behind bars. They see that, their movements are restricted. They cannot go in and out of their cell, or they cannot go from one program to the other program unless they get cleared by the correctional police officer. But when you have been in the prison for 30 plus years, and when you are thinking about getting out, but you're scared of getting out because your family is gone,
Yeah.
that's an impact, right? And so the ripple effects, like I said, are far beyond the scope of what I can really elucidate. From the service provider perspective, you have the vicarious trauma and the burnout. From the victim's perspective, you have various symptoms of trauma, whether it could be post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. The list is actually quite long for me to go into that. And obviously for the inmate population as well.
again, that's where, when we're talking about the resilience in action and the redemption and accountability, when you're looking at the ripple effects of the trauma, all these come back into play on how do I take that accountability and how do I make those changes? And even if some folks are like, well, I haven't been a victim, I haven't been a survivor, I haven't been an offender, what good is this information to me? How would you address that? And I say that because sometimes people don't look at things until it affects them, right? And I think a lot of this can be used in everyday life as well, is when we think about our actions and how they affect other people. It does have that same ripple effect, even if it's not a violent offense, right? The tongue's a very powerful weapon. What are the things that you're saying? And how do we build ourselves up and work through harmful, right? Emotional abuse, verbal abuse. And then how do we do that, take that accountability and take that moving forward and use some of these same techniques in our everyday life?
That is a complex question to answer. So I will start by saying that understand that as human beings, right? We are not perfect. We're perfectly imperfect, right?
Yes.
So let's start with that. And you do not have to carry the label of victim, but we do acknowledge that some things happen, right? Some negative things happen to us or to other people. Understand first and foremost what those coping mechanisms are. Do you drink alcohol every single time that you're dealing with a high stressor? Or do you have a positive coping mechanism? Could be journaling or meditating. Make a list of what those coping mechanisms are. You would be surprised to see how many of us really engage in those negative ones. Yes. And the more we engage in those negative coping mechanisms, the more we are pushing our bodies to not heal. Because a lot of times we think that, through either drug use or alcohol use or being a shopaholic, it just covers the emotions and the issues, the underlying issues. So if there's any information that I could share right now, it would be understand what's impacting you and face it, right? It's like Jordan Peterson says, and I'm not quoting him by any means. You have to stare at the abyss until it stares back into you, but don't be afraid. Just push forward. Keep staring at it. It's like face your demons. We all have them. Push forward. Don't give up. And understand that you will maybe be put in a position where you're going to be able to help someone else. And also know, and this is my perspective, and maybe, other people might disagree. There's wisdom that comes from traumatic experiences.
Absolutely.
And in that wisdom, we can become teachers. And in that wisdom, we can help others, right? And we really have to step away from all the woe is me or this strange mentality, which I'm not going to go into right now, where people want to feel victimized, so they want to be perceived as victims. Push through that. You're better than that. You're a thriver, have that warrior mentality, as David Goggins will probably say.
Yeah. Don't just survive, thrive, definitely.
Right.
So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to finish out the show with a discussion on creating change and hope. This is Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills. Living it up, loving it up, letting it go. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills. Living it up, loving it up, letting it go. If you missed any information during the last segments, go to getrootedradio.com to listen to the replay. Don't forget to subscribe, sign up for tips and special events, and pricing for upcoming coaching sessions at getrootedradio.com. Welcome back to my guest, Gladian Rivera. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me today.
Tell folks how they can connect with you.
Absolutely. I have a LinkedIn account. You can search me by typing my full name, Gladian Rivera.
Wonderful. So during the last few segments, we discussed resilience in action, redemption and accountability, and the ripple effects of trauma. I'd like to finish the show out today about talking about creating that hope and that the change in hope. So one of the things I first want, because you talked about developing programs in a couple of the other segments. So before I ask this one question, tell us a little bit about your experiencing developing those programs.
I will say this. I think that God has given me opportunities and I've been blessed to really establish programs. And it all started when I was in the correctional system. I briefly talked about the restorative justice-based program that we conducted. I did not set that program up, but it gave me an opportunity to see how the programs would run in the system. And I had the wonderful opportunity to establish the first program to address the trauma from sexual victimization at the Women's Correctional Facility. And it was a program that I truly cherished. It was wonderful. It was insightful, educational for the women. And it really gave me that opportunity to see the power of really creating these structures to help people. And after that, I created a couple of other programs. And right now, we're at the position that I'm in, I was given the opportunity to create another one, but I won't go into details for that. And to be able to see how changes do happen when you strongly believe in it and when you work in that faith and you conduct the research, you make sure that you have the right people and the mentors to help you create these new programs with a goal of helping people that deserve it.
And I think that right there is that creating that change and hope. And we talked about some of your career experiences, but I want to go back to something that you said during the first segment is creating those professional and maintaining those professional boundaries in that intense environment. So one, I want you to reiterate kind of how you kept that balance and how then those experiences shaped you.
Sure. I learned to say the word no and get comfortable with the word no.
Yes. No is a full sentence.
No is a full sentence, is a powerful statement. And it gives you space to say yes to yourself.
Yeah.
When I learned that from one of my mentors, Dr. Hubbard, I hope that she listens to this one day, saying no to someone or something is saying yes to yourself. It was so impactful for me. So let me backtrack a little bit. When working with the inmate population, you have to have strong boundaries. That means that they don't get to call me by my first name, they call me by my last name. So I was Miss Rivera. I don't share anything about myself, okay? When you work with the inmate population, restrict all your information. There's no reason why they need to know where you live. There's no reason why they need to know who your family is. There's no reason to know anything about you.
Yeah.
You're there to do a job. When I would have a situation where an inmate would get a little snappy with me, and which it did happen, excuse me, sir, this is not the time, make sure that please lower the tone of your voice. This is inappropriate behavior, and go and speak with a correctional police officer. So again, it's knowing about what you're willing to tolerate, what you're unwilling to tolerate, but also what is within the parameters of the structure that you're working in. What are those policies and what are those procedures, right? Now, that's corrections. Professional boundaries, right? So I am still figuring out at which points do I lower the guard, right? I'm not someone that opens up and talks about my personal life all the time. And I think it rubs people the wrong way sometimes, because obviously we want to connect, we want to get to know who we are working with. And if you observe people who are typically more kept to themselves, who are reserved, who don't really open up and share who they are, they're typically pushed aside, because obviously as people, and again, I'm going back to the topic of being human,
Right.
people want to be able to trust you. And so navigating that carefully is important. You want to open up, but you get to decide, how much do I want to share and why do I need to share this information? Because another thing is, when we circle back to manipulation real quick, there are people in the workplace, and like I said, everywhere else, they want to know your childhood experiences and what your traumas are. They want to trauma bond, or they want to exploit those childhood experiences. And a lot of it's, believe it or not, sometimes a game of seduction, right? And it's for any woman out there that has encountered someone that automatically they want to know what happened to you, tell me everything. Just hold your horses there for a bit. It's like, why do you need to know that information? What's in it for you? Right? A connection should be authentic. A connection should not be pushed. A connection should not be forced.
And I think that's important. So we're coming to the close of the show. I'd like to know, what are you hoping listeners take away from your stories and your experiences in your work?
I think for anyone who has been victimized by any type of crime, who is still dealing with the after effects, and may not necessarily be a traumatic response, let's just call it an after effect, understand and know that there is help out there. Understand and know that even though you might express certain concerns to family members or friends, some of them may not necessarily be equipped or have received the adequate training to give you the support that you deserve. Don't fault them for that, but do reach out to the service providers or the agencies that can give you the support you deserve. For people who are in the correctional system, don't lose hope. Continue pushing forward, participate in those programs. Make sure that when you come out, because let's be honest here, most people that are in the current prison system, they are going to come out. And so they need to be prepared. They need to receive education. They need programming. Understand that the battle will be an uphill battle. To feel welcome back into society is going to be a challenge, but have faith that you can change and show it through actions, not through words. And I've seen great men and women who exited the prison system to do amazing and great things, far beyond the scope of what I've seen in other people that have never been into the prison system. For the general audience, I would say that know what your boundaries are. Understand that no is a powerful word. Understand that manipulation is real, and don't allow yourself to be put in situations where you can be manipulated. And if it does happen, give yourself enough grace to understand that it can happen to anyone, and that it is a lesson that was meant to be learned. And don't punish yourself too much, right? So at the end of the day, I guess the overall message is, give yourself and others the grace, for we do not know the stories that we've all gone through.
And that is a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Gladian.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank you all for tuning in to Get Rooted Radio. If you missed any part of today's episode or want to listen again, go to getrootedradio.com for the podcast. And don't forget to tune in the first and third Monday of each month at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, and 2 p.m. Pacific, right here on Transformation Talk Radio. Before I sign off, Ask yourself if you are living a rooted life. If the answer is no, set up your free Empower Hour call with me. No charge, no obligations. Go to getrootedradio.com to find out how I can help you take action now. And if you are ready to live, love, and let go, then my new award-winning book and companion workbook, The Rooted Life, Live, Love, Let Go, is for you. Check out the bundle deal at getrootedradio.com under the author section and order your signed copy today. And one last personal message. If you are hurting or need help, please know the world needs you and it is a better place with you in it. Don't let the hard days win. Reach out for assistance. Call or text or chat the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. That's 988. It's 24/7 and the cost is free. Or text HOME, HOME, to 741-741 to reach a trained crisis counselor through Crisis Text Line. Also free, 24/7 confidential. Thank you for tuning in. Have an amazing day and know that you are loved. I am looking forward to the next time on Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills. Living it up, loving it up, letting it go. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Get Rooted Radio with Erica Gifford Mills, living it up, loving it up, and letting it go. Visit getrootedradio.com if you have missed any part of this hit show, and tune in on transformationtalkradio.com to live fearlessly in your more and powerfully rooted in your unlimited yes. For more information and to work with Erica directly, visit getrootedradio.com. That's getrootedradio.com, and get ready to live it up, love it up, and let it go.